would like to take you back in time to the year 132 CE, the year that the Bar Kokhba rebellion, the third great Jewish war against the Roman occupation, began. By this time, Jews had already lived in the land of Israel for over 1,500 years. They had already endured occupation and destruction by the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the destruction of the first and second temples. Now they were fighting their third major war against the cruel Roman occupation. But in the year 136 CE, the Bar Kokhba rebellion was brutally crushed. The Roman Emperor Hadrian had enough with the Jews and their rebellions. He decided to not only defeat the Jews, but to erase all connection between Jews and Judea, as Israel was called at that time. Understanding the importance of words, he decided that the best way to erase the connection between Jews and Israel was to rename the land. Hadrian knew that the Jews once had a powerful enemy, the Plishtim, a seafaring people. The name Plishtim probably came from Hebrew. Plisha means invasion, and Polshim means invaders. They had long ago assimilated into other tribes and were no longer in existence, but their name would do. In order to erase the connection between the Jewish people and her land, Hadrian attached Judea to Syria and renamed the area Syria Palestina, or Palestine. But in spite of the massacres and exiles of hundreds of thousands of Jews by the Roman Empire and the later occupiers of the land, Jews continued to live in the land of Israel. They had synagogues and issued coins. They had many communities in the land, but the conquerors made it very tough for Jews living in Israel. Due to persecution and the high taxes imposed on the Jews by the various occupiers, both Christian and Muslim, the Jewish farmers were forced to leave their lands, eventually congregating mainly in urban areas, especially in the cities of Jerusalem, Hebron, Tiberias, and Tzfat. Even Jews no longer living in the land of Israel did not forget their land. Jews from all over the world ended, as we still end, two major holidays with the words, "Next year in Jerusalem," L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim. But for the Christian world, the geographical area, including the land of Israel, continued to be called Palestine. That is the reason the delegates at the First Zionist Congress at Basel, August 29, 1897, used the name Palestine as the location for the home for the Jewish people. This was the name used in the Balfour Declaration, November 2, 1917. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. And this was the name used at the San Remo Conference, convened in 1920 to make decisions about the ex-Ottoman territories in Asia at the end of World War I. It was at the San Remo Conference that Palestine, on both sides of the Jordan River, was created to be the national home of the Jewish people under the Mandate system, just as the Arabs were given the territories of Mesopotamia, which became Iraq in 1932 under a British mandate, Syria, which became independent in 1946, and Lebanon under a French mandate, in addition to the already existing state of Hijaz, which along with Nejd became Saudi Arabia in 1932. In the early drafts of the mandate for Palestine, the words Eretz Yisrael appeared in full in brackets next to the name Palestine in the preamble of the document. It was clear to all that Palestine was another name for Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. In Hebrew, the name Palestina was always followed by the letters Aleph Yud in brackets. Oops, I'm trying to get the laser here. Here's the Aleph Yud, do you see? And here, Aleph Yud, standing for Eretz Yisrael. In Hebrew, the newly mandated area was called Palestina I, Aleph Yud, Eretz Yisrael. And the Jews enthusiastically adopted the name Palestine in the names they used for their institutions. The Jerusalem Post was originally called the Palestine Post. Bank Leumi L'Yisrael, the bank, was originally called the Anglo-Palestine Company until 1948. The Israel Philharmonic Orchestra was called, in English, the Palestine Philharmonic Orchestra. In Hebrew, it was called the Philharmonic Orchestra of Eretz Yisrael, Hatizmorat Philharmonita Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael, land of Israel. The name Palestine was the non-Hebrew name for the land of Israel. This is a picture of the Larousse French Dictionary from 1939. In the appendix, it lists all the then current flags of the world in alphabetical order. Here is the flag of Palestine. In fact, until 1948, when the modern state of Israel was established, the term Palestinian meant Jews living in mandated Palestine. On the other hand, and unlike the Jews, the Arabs totally rejected the name Palestine. A local Arab leader, Abd al-Mahdi, testified before the Peel Commission in 1937 as follows: "There is no such land. Palestine is a term invented by the Zionists. There is no Palestine in the Bible. Our land was for hundreds of years a part of Syria." In 1956, Ahmed Shukri proclaimed from the podium of the UN as the Arab League's ambassador there, "Such a creature as Palestine does not exist at all. This land is nothing but the southern portion of Greater Syria." But the meaning of the words Palestine and Palestinian were to change, turning history upside down. 16 years after the State of Israel was born, Arab propaganda, under the guidance of the Soviet secret police, the KGB, decided to change the perception of Israel as the David and the Arabs as Goliath. Even though they had rejected the name Palestine in the past, Arab leaders now realized that it could be very beneficial for their cause. They created a mythical Arab Palestine, and as we'll see later, a Palestinian people. Palestine and Palestinian are non-Arabic names. There even is no P sound in the Arabic language. Arab propaganda relies on the fact that most people are unaware that Palestine was the name given by the Roman occupiers of the land of Israel to make people forget that the land of Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people. And people also forgot what this so-called Arab country called Palestine looked like when, according to Arab propaganda, Arabs called Palestinians lived there. For after the Jewish farmers were forced off their lands by the high taxes imposed by the various occupiers, the land fell into neglect. Mark Twain wrote in The Innocents Abroad, 1867, "There is not a solitary village throughout its whole extent," referring to the valley of Jezreel, "not for 30 miles in either direction. One may ride 10 miles hereabouts and not see 10 human beings, until the Jewish pioneers, at first mainly from Russia and Yemen, began to work the neglected land." Kibbutz workers in the early 1900s. Report of the British Royal Commission, 1913. The area was underpopulated and remained economically stagnant until the arrival of the first Zionist pioneers in the 1880s who came to rebuild the Jewish land. Jewish development of the country also attracted large numbers of other immigrants, both Jewish and Arab. Swamp draining in Israel, the 1920s. Telek Bel el-Horani, the governor of the Haran, southwestern Syria, stated in an interview with Lasiri published on August 12, 1934, that in the last few months, from 30,000 to 36,000 Haranese had entered Palestine and settled there. But the fact that most of the Arabs who ended up in the land entered the land of Israel after more Jews began settling and creating work opportunities there is forgotten. By taking on the name Palestinians, Arabs portray themselves as the original inhabitants of Palestine, an independent country that never existed. And this mysterious country called Palestine seems to change its boundaries depending on which land the Jews control. The area governed by the mandate for Palestine, reserved for the Jewish people, once looked like this. But just before the mandate was approved by the League of Nations, the British divided the land, giving 77% of this land to the Hashemite Bedouins, which became the Hashemite Kingdom of Transjordan, the original two-state solution. Yet the Arabs did not refer to what became Transjordan as Palestine. Likewise, when the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, was founded in 1964, and Judea and Samaria, renamed the West Bank, was annexed to Jordan, and Gaza was ruled by Egypt, the PLO did not consider the so-called West Bank and Gaza to be part of Palestine. The original Palestine National Charter, 1964, Article 24 states, this organization does not exercise any regional sovereignty over the West Bank in the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, on the Gaza Strip, or the Hema area. In other words, Palestine was defined as the land within the Green Line, the 1949 armistice lines, what you see in the light pink. This was described by the Arabs as Palestine, not beyond. Palestine did not include the so-called West Bank or Gaza. So the slogan that you hear all over and over, from the river to the sea, did not apply in 1964, 65, 66, and part of 67. However, once Judea and Samaria and Gaza were liberated by Israel, and in a few minutes I'll explain my use of the word liberated, Palestine's definition changed once again. The PLO Charter of 1968 now omitted Article 24. All of Israel, including the so-called West Bank and Gaza, were now part of Palestine. And it was after Israel regained control over this land that people called Palestinians were created. Walid Shoabat, a former PLO terrorist, stated, "Why is it that on June 4th, 1967, I was a Jordanian, and overnight I became a Palestinian? We did not particularly mind Jordanian rule. The teaching of the destruction of Israel was a definite part of the curriculum, but we considered ourselves Jordanian until the Jews returned to Jerusalem. Then all of a sudden, we were Palestinians. They removed the star from the Jordanian flag, and all at once, we had a Palestinian flag." Walid Shoabat continued, "As I lived in Palestine, everyone I knew could trace their heritage back to the original country their great-grandparents came from. The fact is that today's Palestinians are immigrants from the surrounding nations. I grew up well knowing the history and origins of today's Palestinians as being from Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, Christians from Greece, Muslim Shurkas from Russia, Muslims from Bosnia, and the Jordanians next door. Surprisingly, the fact that people who now call themselves Palestinians were newcomers from surrounding countries was confirmed by the Hamas Minister of Interior and of National Security, Fatih Hamad, who said on Egyptian El Hakma TV on March 23, 2012, "Allah be praised, we all have Arab roots, and every Palestinian in Gaza and throughout Palestine can prove his Arab roots, whether from Saudi Arabia, from Yemen, or anywhere. Brothers, half of the Palestinians are Egyptian and the other half are Saudis. Who are the Palestinians? We have many families called Al-Masri, whose roots are Egyptian, like Mitzri, Mitzrayim in Hebrew. They may be from Alexandria, from Cairo, from Damietta, from the north, from Aswan, from Upper Egypt. We are Egyptians, we are Arabs, we are Muslims." Zahir Hussein, executive member of the PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization, in an interview with the Dutch newspaper Trouw, March 1977, said it very clearly. "The Palestinian people does not exist. The creation of a Palestinian state is only a means for continuing our struggle against the state of Israel for our Arab unity. In reality today, there's no difference between Jordanians, Palestinians, Syrians, and Lebanese. Only for political and tactical reasons do we speak today about the existence of a Palestinian people, since Arab national interests demand that we posit the existence of a distinct Palestinian people to oppose Zionism." And so, the word Palestine, which was the name used by the Roman Emperor Hadrian to make the world forget that the land of Israel belongs to the Jews, is once again being used, this time by Arabs and others, to make the world forget that the land of Israel is the homeland of the Jews. Before 1948, the word Palestinians referred to Jews living in mandatory Palestine. Now it refers to a group of non-Jewish people who, for political reasons, call themselves and are called Palestinians. History turned upside down. And now I have to clarify a word that I used. I mentioned that Israel liberated Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, whereas many would use the word occupied. What is my justification? We need to go, once again, back in time. After the San Remo Conference in 1920, where the lands of the former Ottoman Empire were given to the Arabs and Jews under the mandate system, the mandate for Palestine was unanimously approved by the entire 51 member countries of the League of Nations on July 24, 1922. In the preamble to the mandate, it states, "Whereas recognition has been given to the historical connection of the Jewish people with Palestine and to the grounds for reconstituting their national home in that country." Reconstituting, for there was recognition of the centuries of expulsions and persecutions of Jews in the land of Israel as recently as World War I, where in the 4 years beginning at the start of World War I, the Jewish community was reduced by half through expulsion and deliberate starvation. A lot of people don't remember the expulsion of the Jews from Tel Aviv by the Ottoman Turks, where more than one in five died of starvation. As mandatory, the British were obligated to fulfill the articles of the mandate. We'll just look at two of the articles. Article 6, the administration of Palestine, while ensuring that the rights and position of other sections of the population are not prejudiced, shall facilitate Jewish immigration under suitable conditions, and shall encourage in cooperation with the Jewish agency referred to in Article 4, close settlement by Jews on the land, including state lands and wastelands not required for public purposes. Article 5, the mandatory shall be responsible for seeing that no Palestine territory shall be ceded or leased to or in any way placed under the control of the government of any foreign power. I already mentioned that the British, in 1922, gave the Arabs a further 77% of the land that was supposed to be reserved for the Jewish homeland. Jewish settlement in these areas was now strictly forbidden. In 1923, the British then illegally gave further land, parts of the Golan Heights, to the French, which later became part of Syria. However, the creation of yet another state in eastern Palestine did not change the status of Jews west of the Jordan River, or the right to settle anywhere in western Palestine, the area between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. All this area was to be used for Jewish settlement. However, the British did not keep any of their obligations under the mandate. For example, Article 6 of the mandate, which we just read, Britain was obligated to help and encourage Jewish immigration into the land. If the British had kept this obligation, Jews would have been able to escape from Hitler. Instead, the British had gunboats out and would not let the Jews in. However, their not keeping their obligations did not affect the legal authority of the mandate's provisions. And the rights given to the Jewish people under the mandate for Palestine are still valid according to international law today. On October 24, 1945, the UN was established. The present United Nations Charter recognizes its obligation to uphold the commitments of the League of Nations. Article 80 of the UN Charter states that rights gained through a mandate will not expire as a result of the expiration of the mandate. Thus, Jews are allowed to settle anywhere in Judea and Samaria, which the Arabs and others call the West Bank. On the 5th of Iyar, May 14, 1948, the modern state of Israel was born. 5 Arab armies attack in a genocidal war against the state of Israel. Azam Pasha, Secretary General of the Arab League, declared, "This will be a war of extermination and a momentous massacre." Israel, thank God, survived the war. Armistice agreements were signed between Israel and neighboring Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria. The agreements ended the official hostilities of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. The armistice demarcation line is also referred to as the Green Line because green ink was used to draw the line on the map while the talks were going on. This line was never recognized as a border. It has no legal implications, and thus there is no such thing as the so-called 1967 borders. During the war, Jews who had lived in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza for thousands of years were slaughtered, and any surviving Jews were expelled, or in modern parlance, ethnically cleansed from these areas, including the heart of Jerusalem. The Jews in Hebron had already been slaughtered in 1929, and any survivors expelled. Like Hadrian in the year 136, the Jordanians realized that it was crucial to rename Judea and Samaria, the names that had been used for these areas for thousands of years, including in official British and Ottoman documents, in order to try and erase the Jewish connection with this land. People have forgotten that Jews received their name from Judea. Up until now, the Hashemite kingdom of Transjordan, trans meaning across the river from Jordan, was on the east side of the Jordan River. Okay? Now, they occupied land also on the west side of the Jordan River. So now the Jordanian kingdom became known as the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan, minus the trans, and turning history upside down, making people forget or not even know that Judea and Samaria not only belonged to the Jewish people, but is the birthplace of this people, renamed this area the West Bank. Who ever heard of a bank of a river that is 32.3 miles or 52 kilometers across? The Jordanian occupation of Judea and Samaria, I do not use the term West Bank, and which lasted for only 19 years, from 1948 to 1967, was the real occupation. Judea and Samaria are not occupied Palestinian land. They never belonged to a so-called Palestinian people, or even to Jordan. Thus I use the term that Israel liberated Judea and Samaria, and this land belongs to the Jewish people under international law. So we have looked at a number of words that have turned history upside down. Palestine, the name that the Emperor Hadrian gave to the land of Israel in order to erase the memory that the land of Israel belongs to the Jews. Palestinians, the name that originally referred to Jews living under the Mandate for Palestine, but was taken over by some Arabs in order to convince the world that they are a separate people who were the original inhabitants of a country, Palestine, that never existed. 1967 border, a border that does not exist, for the armistice line of 1949 was never accepted as a border. The West Bank, a renaming of Judea and Samaria by the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan in order to erase the memory that Judea and Samaria are Jewish lands, and occupied Palestinian land. From 1948 to 1967, when the so-called West Bank was annexed by Jordan, no one called these territories occupied Palestinian land. But as we saw, the mysterious land of Palestine changes its boundaries according to the land with which the Jews control. We have seen that Judea and Samaria, renamed the West Bank, are not occupied by Israel, and according to international law valid to this day, belong to the Jewish people. Calling for the removal of all Jews in the so-called West Bank is in fact calling for the ethnic cleansing of Jews a second time.